Do not come any closer, or I will scream and make you regret it for the rest of your life." The little girl shouted, her voice breaking into sharp, panicked echoes that cut through the cold night air, and yet less than a minute later, she collapsed against the very man she feared, her small body going limp as if every ounce of strength had been drained from her. The highway stretched for miles in both directions, empty and silent except for the distant hum of wind brushing against dry grass and the faint ticking of a cooling engine as Jake Razor Morrison stepped off his motorcycle, boots hitting gravel with a slow, deliberate weight. He had seen trouble before, more times than he cared to count, but something about this felt different. Something in the way the girl stood barefoot on the shoulder of the road, her thin frame trembling, her wide eyes locked on him like he was the last thing she ever wanted to see. Her hair was tangled, her clothes were dirty and torn at the edges, and there was a kind of fear in her face that did not belong to a child who had simply gotten lost. Jake raised his hand slightly, not too fast, not too slow, his voice low and steady as he spoke into the darkness between them, telling her he was not going to hurt her, telling her she was safe now, even though he knew she did not believe a single word. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. The wind picked up again, colder this time, biting through the thin fabric of the girl's shirt as she took a step back. Then another, her heel catching on loose gravel as her breathing grew faster, louder, almost desperate. And Jake could see it happening before it did. The way her knees began to shake, the way her shoulders slumped as exhaustion overtook fear, and then suddenly she stumbled forward instead of away, her small hands clutching at his jacket with surprising strength before. Everything gave out at once. Jake reacted on instinct, catching her before she hit the ground, his rough hand steady as he pulled her against his chest, feeling how light she was, how fragile, how dangerously cold. For a second, he froze, staring down at the child who had just screamed at him like he was a monster, now curled against him like he was the only safe place left in the world, and something deep in his chest tightened in a way he had not felt in years. He looked around the empty road, the endless darkness pressing in from all sides, and a thought settled heavily in his mind. This girl was not just lost. She had been running, and whatever she had been running from might still be out there, watching, waiting, and getting closer with every passing second. The girl did not wake when Jake shifted his grip, her small body pressed against him as if clinging to the last bit of warmth she could find. And for a moment, he simply stood there on the side of the empty highway, the weight of her in his arms feeling heavier than it should have been, not because of her size, but because of what it meant, because children did not end up alone in the middle of nowhere unless something had gone very wrong. Her breathing was shallow but steady, warm against his chest in short, uneven bursts, and he could feel the chill of her skin through the thin fabric of her clothes, a cold that had settled deep, the kind that did not come from a few minutes outside, but from hours, maybe longer, exposed to the night air without protection. Jake tightened his hold slightly, adjusting her so her head rested more securely against his shoulder, his rough hand moving carefully, almost awkwardly, as if he was afraid she might break if he was not gentle enough. And that thought alone stirred something in him he had spent years trying to bury. He had held someone like this before, long ago, when his hands had been steadier in a different way, when the world had not yet hardened every instinct into survival and distance, and the memory flickered just out of reach, sharp enough to hurt, but not clear enough to fully see. He pushed it down, forcing his focus back to the present as he glanced down the long stretch of road in both directions, searching for headlights, for movement, for any sign that someone might be coming, but there was nothing, only darkness and the quiet hum of the wind, rolling across the open land. That was when he noticed it, the faint mark along the girl's wrist, half hidden beneath dirt and shadow, a darker line that did not belong there, not a scrape from a fall or a bruise from stumbling, but something more deliberate, something that made his jaw tighten as he leaned slightly to get a better look without disturbing her. The skin around it was tender, irritated, like it had been pressed or bound for too long, and suddenly the pieces in his mind began to shift, the fear in her eyes, the way she had screamed, the way she had not trusted him even for a second. That was not fear of a stranger. That was fear learned the hard way. Jake exhaled slowly, the breath leaving his lungs in a controlled release as his grip on reality sharpened, and the quiet night around him no longer felt empty. It felt watched. He turned his head slightly, listening, not just hearing but truly listening the way he had learned to do in places far from home, where silence often meant danger, where the absence of sound was sometimes the loudest warning of all, and for a brief second he thought he caught it, something distant, something mechanical, the low rumble of an engine far off the highway, too far to see but close enough to matter. His eyes narrowed as he shifted his stance, angling his body to shield the girl instinctively, his senses sharpening as every instinct he had built over years of surviving the worst kinds of nights came roaring back to the surface. This was no longer a simple roadside stop. This was something else, something unfolding in real time, and he was already in the middle of it whether he liked it or not. He glanced down at her again, at the way her small hand had tightened slightly in the fabric of his jacket, even in sleep, as if some part of her still knew she needed to hold on, and that was enough. The decision settled into place without hesitation, solid and unmovable. He was not leaving her here, not for anything. Carefully, he moved toward his motorcycle, each step measured and quiet, his boots crunching lightly against the gravel as he reached the bike and paused just long enough to consider his options. Riding with one arm was not ideal, not even close, but staying here was worse, especially if that distant sound was what he thought it was. He swung his leg over the bike with controlled precision, positioning her carefully in front of him so she was secure against his chest, one arm wrapped around her protectively while the other reached for the handlebars, his movements deliberate, practiced, the kind of control that came from years of adapting to situations that did not allow for mistakes. The engine roared to life beneath him, breaking the silence with a deep, powerful growl that echoed across the empty stretch of land, and for a split second he hesitated, scanning the darkness one last time, feeling that same instinctive warning settle deep in his gut. Whoever had put that fear into this child was still out there, and now they might be looking for her. Jake leaned forward slightly, his voice low as he spoke, not expecting her to hear, but needing to say it anyway. "You're safe now." Then he twisted the throttle, and the motorcycle surged forward into the night, carrying them away from whatever had been chasing her, and straight toward whatever came next. The motorcycle cut through the darkness like a blade, its engine echoing across the open highway as Jake kept his body low and steady, one arm locked protectively around the girl while the other controlled the machine beneath them with practiced precision. Every movement calculated, every shift of weight deliberate, because there was no room for error now, not with a child in his arms and a feeling in his gut that refused to settle. The wind rushed past them in cold waves, biting against his face and tugging at the girl's tangled hair. But she did not stir, did not wake. Her small form pressed firmly against him, as if her body had decided that this was the safest place it had known in a long time. Jake's eyes scanned the road ahead, then flicked briefly to the side mirrors, checking, always checking, because that faint sound he had heard earlier had not left his mind. It lingered there like a warning he could not ignore, and instinct had kept him alive long enough to know when to listen. A mile passed, then another, the empty stretch of asphalt unfolding beneath them with no other vehicles in sight. No headlights, no movement, and yet the tension in his shoulders did not ease. If anything, it tightened, because silence like this was never as empty as it seemed. He shifted slightly, adjusting his hold on the girl, making sure she was secure, his hands spreading across her back to keep her steady as the bike hit a small dip in the road. And that was when she made a sound, barely more than a breath, a soft broken whisper that almost disappeared beneath the roar of the engine. "No, please do not let them find me." The words were faint, tangled in sleep, but they hit him harder than anything else that night, and his jaw clenched as his gaze sharpened, because that was not the voice of a child who had simply wandered too far from home. That was fear rooted deep, fear that followed even into unconsciousness. He leaned forward slightly, increasing speed just enough to put more distance between them and whatever might be behind, the engine responding with a deeper growl as the landscape blurred into streaks of shadow and pale moonlight. The town was still several miles ahead, a small cluster of lights barely visible in the distance. And Jake began to calculate, not just distance but options, places he could go, people he could trust, if any, because bringing her to a hospital meant questions, reports, attention, and attention was not always safe, not if the wrong people were looking. His mind worked through possibilities with quiet efficiency, each one weighed and discarded until only a few remained, and none of them were simple. The girl shifted again in his arms, her fingers tightening weakly against his jacket, as if she was holding on to something even in her dreams. And Jake felt that same pressure in his chest return, heavier this time, more insistent, a reminder of something he had lost and never truly faced. He had spent years telling himself that distance kept people safe, that staying out of situations like this was the only way to survive. But now here he was riding straight into the kind of trouble he used to avoid without a second thought, and he had not hesitated for even a moment. The road curved gently to the right, leading toward a narrow service route that cut behind the main highway, a path most drivers ignored but Jake knew it well, had used it before when he needed to move unseen, and without slowing, he leaned in the turn, guiding the bike off the main road and into the darker stretch beyond, where the streetlights faded and the shadows grew deeper. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as he adjusted speed, keeping control steady despite the uneven ground, and as they disappeared into the back road, the distant highway fell silent behind them, replaced by the quieter, more controlled hum of the engine and the whisper of wind through sparse trees. Jake glanced over his shoulder one more time, eyes searching the darkness they had left behind, and for a split second, far in the distance, he thought he saw it, a flicker of light, faint but real, like headlights cresting the far edge of the road. His grip tightened instinctively as his focus snapped forward again, every sense sharpening at once. They were not alone out here, and whoever was out there had not given up. The narrow back road swallowed them in darkness, the faint glow of the distant highway disappearing behind a wall of trees and uneven terrain as Jake eased the motorcycle into a lower speed, trading distance for control, because out here one wrong move could send both of them sliding across loose gravel with no one around to help. And that was not a risk he was willing to take. The engine settled into a quieter rhythm, a low, steady rumble that blended into the night. And for the first time since he had found the girl, Jake allowed himself to listen more closely to her breathing, to the subtle rise and fall of her chest against his arm, searching for any sign that she might be getting worse. Her skin was still cold, but not as sharp as before, and her breathing, though uneven, had steadied just enough to ease the tightest edge of concern in his mind. Still, something about the way she remained completely unresponsive did not sit right with him. And as he adjusted his hold again, he spoke quietly, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine in a tone that was firm but calm. "Hey kid, can you hear me?" There was no answer, only a faint shift of her weight as her head rested more heavily against him. And then, after a moment, her fingers twitched slightly against his jacket, not enough to wake, but enough to tell him she was still there, still fighting whatever had pushed her this far. Jake exhaled slowly, his focus splitting between the road ahead and the girl in his arms, every instinct pulling him in different directions, one part of him urging speed, to get somewhere safe as quickly as possible, the other demanding caution, reminding him that rushing into the unknown could be just as dangerous as whatever they were running from. The road curved again, this time sharper, forcing him to lean the bike carefully as the tires shifted against the loose surface. And for a brief second the rear wheel slid just enough to send a jolt through his grip, but he corrected smoothly, years of experience guiding the movement without hesitation. He had ridden through worse, much worse, but never with something this fragile depending on him. The thought lingered, heavier than before, and it brought with it a flicker of something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. Responsibility not just for survival, but for someone else's safety, someone who had no control over the situation she was trapped in. The trees thinned slightly as the road opened into a wider stretch, revealing an old service building up ahead, barely visible in the dim light, its structure worn and quiet, a place that had likely been abandoned years ago, but still offered something valuable in a moment like this: cover. Jake slowed further, guiding the motorcycle toward the edge of the building, positioning it in the shadow where it would not be immediately visible from a road. And once the engine cut off, the sudden silence pressed in around them, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint rustle of wind moving through the dry brush. For a moment, he did not move, listening again, his senses reaching outward into the darkness, searching for that distant engine he had noticed before, and there it was clearer now, not close, but not far enough to ignore a low mechanical growl carried faintly across the open space beyond the trees. Jake's jaw tightened as his grip instinctively shifted, pulling the girl closer as if he could shield her from something he could not yet see. And that was when she stirred more noticeably, a soft whimper escaping her lips as her body tensed for a brief second before settling again. No, please do not let them take me back. The words were fragile, broken, but unmistakable, and they confirmed what he already knew deep down. This was not just a child who had wandered away. This was someone who had escaped. Jake moved then, carefully stepping off the bike while keeping her secure in his arms, his boots landing quietly against the dirt as he adjusted his stance, scanning the shadows around the building, every corner, every dark edge, making sure they were alone before moving further in. He carried her toward the side of the structure, where a partially collapsed overhang provided some shelter from the wind, and as he lowered himself into a crouch position, he shifted her gently, so she was supported more comfortably, his jacket pulled tighter around her small frame to preserve what warmth he could. His movements were deliberate, controlled, the kind that came from experience, but there was something else in them now, something quieter, more careful than anything he had shown in years. He looked down at her again, at the way her face had softened in sleep despite the fear that still lingered beneath the surface. And for a brief moment, everything else faded, the road, the danger, the unknown presence in the distance, all of it pushed aside by a single clear thought. Whoever had done this to her had made a mistake, because now she was no longer alone. The wind pressed softly against the broken structure, whispering through cracks in the old metal walls as Jake stayed crouched beneath the collapsed overhang. His body angled protectively around the girl while his eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the tree line, listening, measuring, waiting. The distant engine's sound came again, slightly louder this time, no longer something his mind could dismiss as imagination, and it carried a rhythm that did not belong to passing traffic, slow, searching, deliberate. Jake's gaze hardened as he shifted his weight, careful not to disturb the girl resting against him, his hand still steady at her back while his other moved to adjust the edge of his jacket around her shoulders, sealing in what little warmth remained. Her breathing had changed again, deeper now, but uneven in a way that told him her body was still fighting exhaustion, still caught somewhere between fear and relief. He lowered his head slightly, bringing his voice close to her ear, quiet enough that it would not carry, but steady enough to reach her if she was close to waking. "You're safe here. Nobody is going to hurt you." For a moment, there was nothing, only the wind and the faint hum of that engine somewhere in the distance. But then her fingers tightened again against his jacket, a weak but deliberate movement, followed by a soft sound that was closer to a breath than a word. "Stay." The single word hit him harder than anything else she had said, because it was not fear this time. It was trust, fragile and undeserved, placed in someone she had no reason to believe in. Jake swallowed slowly, his jaw tightening as he nodded slightly, even though she could not see it. "I'm not going anywhere." The promise came out low and firm, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just a simple truth he had already accepted the moment he caught her on that road. The sound of gravel shifting somewhere beyond the trees pulled his attention back outward, sharper now, closer than before, and his entire posture changed in an instant, every muscle tightening with controlled readiness as he slowly leaned forward just enough to see past the edge of the structure. Through the gaps in the brush, a faint glow appeared, headlights cutting weakly through the darkness, moving slowly along the main road they had left behind. The vehicle was not speeding, not passing through. It was searching, its movement uneven, pausing, advancing, as if whoever was inside was looking for something or someone. Jake's eyes narrowed as he watched the pattern, his mind already piecing together what that meant, and the cold certainty that settled in his chest confirmed it. They were looking for her. He shifted back into cover immediately, keeping his movements controlled and silent as he pulled the girl closer against him, shielding her completely from view. His breathing slowed, steady and measured, the way it always did when things moved from uncertain to dangerous, when instinct took over and hesitation became a liability. He glanced down at her again, at the faint dirt on her face, the tension that still lingered in her small features even in sleep, and something in him hardened in a different way, not the detached edge he used to rely on, but something more focused, more personal. Whoever was out there had already taken too much from this child. Fear, safety, trust, and he was not about to let them take anything else. The headlights shifted again in the distance, angling slightly as if scanning the edges of the road, and for a brief moment the light caught the open stretch where Jake had first found her, illuminating the empty space where she had stood alone not long ago. Jake watched carefully, counting seconds, tracking movement, waiting for any sign that the vehicle might turn toward the back road, but it did not. Not yet. Still, the way it lingered told him everything he needed to know. This was not over. Not even close. The girl stirred slightly in his arms again, her head turning just enough that her cheek pressed more firmly against his chest, and this time her eyes fluttered open for a brief second, unfocused and glassy, but aware enough to see him. Her lips parted, and for a moment it looked like she might scream again, might pull away, but instead her gaze softened just slightly, confusion replacing fear as she studied his face in the dim light. "You came back." The words were barely audible, fragile and uncertain, and Jake held her steady, his voice low and calm as he answered without hesitation. "I'm still here." Her eyes closed again almost immediately, her body relaxing once more into his arms, and Jake lifted his gaze back toward the darkness beyond the trees, his expression set, his focus unshaken. Whoever was out there could search all they wanted. They were not taking her back. The headlights lingered longer than they should have, sweeping slowly across the empty stretch of highway before dimming slightly as the vehicle rolled forward again, and Jake remained completely still beneath the broken overhang, every muscle locked in quiet control while his eyes tracked the faint glow through the trees. The girl's breathing steadied against him, her small body rising and falling in a fragile rhythm that felt too light, too vulnerable for a world that had already proven how quickly it could turn against her. And as he adjusted his grip just enough to keep her comfortable, something shifted inside him that he could not ignore this time. It was not just instinct anymore, not just the trained reaction to protect something weaker in the moment. It was something deeper, something personal, something that reached back further than he had allowed himself to look in years. His gaze lowered slightly, not to the present, but to something buried beneath it, something tied to a memory he had spent too long avoiding. There had been another night once, different place, different road, but the same cold air, the same sense that something was wrong long before it was visible, and the same hesitation that had cost him more than he could ever fix. He had told himself back then that it was not his responsibility, that stepping would only make things worse, that walking away was the smarter choice, the safer one. And for a long time he had lived with that decision without questioning it, burying it under noise and distance and the constant motion of a life that did not allow for reflection. But the truth had a way of resurfacing when it mattered most, and now, with this child in his arms, the weight of that past pressed in harder than ever, sharp and undeniable. He remembered the sound of a voice calling out, small and uncertain, a moment that had lasted only seconds but stretched endlessly in his mind afterward because he had not turned around, he had not stopped, and by the time he realized what he had walked away from, it had been too late to change anything. The memory tightened his chest as he exhaled slowly, forcing himself back into the present. But the impact remained, shaping his next thought with absolute clarity. Not again. The words did not need to be spoken out loud. They settled into him with quiet certainty, stronger than hesitation, stronger than doubt. The girl shifted slightly in his arms, her hand moving weakly against his jacket as if searching for something to hold on to. And Jake responded instinctively, his hand covering hers in a firm but gentle grip, grounding her without waking her, a silent reassurance that she was not alone anymore. The distant vehicle slowed again, its movement barely visible now through the trees, but still present enough to keep his attention locked on it, and Jake studied the pattern carefully, noting every pause, every slight change in direction, because this was not random. This was methodical. Someone out there was looking with purpose. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to adjust his position without exposing himself, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the distance, the terrain, the possible routes that could lead that vehicle toward this back road. And the answer was clear enough to make his pulse steady rather than spike. If they turned, they would not find him easily, not in this darkness, not without knowing exactly where to look. Still, waiting was not a solution, and staying here too long would only increase the risk. His focus shifted back to the girl once more, and for a moment, everything else faded again, replaced by the simple fact that she was here, alive, breathing, holding on to him without even realizing it, and that alone was enough to guide his next move. He adjusted his stance carefully, preparing to move without rushing, every action controlled, every sound minimized, because now was not just about staying hidden, it was about getting her somewhere safe, somewhere beyond the reach of whoever had forced her into this night. The engine in the distance revved slightly, a subtle change, but enough to signal movement, and Jake's eyes lifted one last time toward the faint glow beyond the trees, his expression steady, his decision already made. He had walked away once before and paid the price for it in silence and regret. He was not making that mistake again. The engine in the distance revved again, louder this time, and Jake knew the window he had was closing fast, the kind of narrow margin where hesitation could turn a controlled situation into something he could not recover from. And he did not allow himself even a second of doubt as he shifted his weight forward and began to move. He rose slowly from his crouched position, keeping the girl secure against his chest with one arm while his other balanced his movement, his boots placing carefully against the dirt to avoid loose gravel that might give away his position, every step deliberate, silent, controlled. The structure behind him creaked softly as the wind pushed against its weakened frame, masking what little sound he made as he moved along its shadowed edge toward the back, where the ground dipped slightly into a narrow path that led deeper into the trees. He had noticed it when they first arrived, a barely visible trail that most would miss in the dark, but to him it stood out as clearly as any road, and now it offered something he needed more than anything else, distance without exposure. The girl shifted in his arms as he moved, her head resting against his shoulder, her breath warm but still uneven, and he adjusted his hold instinctively, tightening his grip just enough to keep her stable without waking her, his hand spreading across her back in a protective brace. He could feel how light she was, how little strength she had left, and it only reinforced what he already knew. Whatever had driven her out here had pushed her past her limits, and time was not on their side. The faint glow of the headlights shifted again through the trees, sweeping wider now, closer to the turnoff that led toward this back road, and Jake's pace increased just slightly, not enough to make noise, but enough to cover more ground before that light found the path he had taken. He stepped carefully over a fallen branch, his boots landing on softer earth as the terrain changed beneath him, the loose gravel giving way to packed dirt and scattered leaves that absorbed sound more easily, and within seconds the structure behind him disappeared into darkness, replaced by the deeper cover of the trees. The air here felt different, heavier, quieter, the kind of silence that wrapped around movement and hid it, and Jake used it to his advantage, continuing forward along the narrow path without looking back, trusting his instincts to guide him through terrain he could barely see. The girl stirred again, this time more noticeably, her fingers tightening suddenly against his jacket as a soft, broken sound escaped her lips, not a scream, not panic, but something closer to confusion. Where am I? The question was weak, disoriented, and Jake slowed just enough to steady her, his voice dropping into a calm, grounded tone as he answered without hesitation. You are with me. You are safe. She shifted slightly, her head lifting just enough that her eyes opened halfway, unfocused but searching, and for a brief moment their gaze met in the dim light filtering through the trees. Fear flickered there again, quick and sharp, but it did not take over this time. It hesitated, held back by something else, something that had begun to take its place. You are not going to take me back. The question came out fragile, almost too quiet to hear, and Jake stopped completely for the first time since leaving the structure, his grip firm but steady as he looked at her, not with softness, not with pity, but with a certainty that did not waver. No. The single word carried more weight than anything else he could have said, because it was not a promise he was hoping to keep, it was a decision he had already made. Her eyes lingered on him for a second longer, searching, measuring, and then slowly, her body relaxed again, the tension easing just enough for her to settle back against him. Her trust not complete, not yet, but no longer broken. Jake resumed, moving immediately, his pace steady as he continued deeper into the trees, the path narrowing further as branches pressed in from both sides, forcing him to angle his body protectively around her to shield her from the rough edges. Behind them, the distant engine grew louder, and through the gaps in the trees, the headlights finally turned, angling toward the back road they had left, confirming what he had already expected. They had found the trail. Jake did not look back this time, did not slow, did not hesitate, because now it was no longer a question of if they were being followed, but how long he had before they caught up. And as he adjusted his grip once more, pulling the girl closer against him, one thought settled firmly into place, clear and unshakable. If they wanted her, they were going to have to come through him first. The sound of the engine behind them grew sharper as it pushed onto the back road, the low rumble no longer distant, but closing in with steady intent. And Jake did not need to look back to know that whoever was driving had picked up the trail, because the rhythm had changed, faster now, more aggressive, no longer searching but following. He moved deeper into the narrow path, branches scraping softly against his shoulders as he angled his body to shield the girl, his steps still controlled but quicker now, the balance between silence and speed narrowing with every passing second. The ground sloped downward ahead, the dirt turning softer, uneven, forcing him to adjust his footing with each step, but he did not slow, not. When the sound behind them was gaining ground, the girl stirred again in his arms, more aware this time, her fingers tightening against him as her head lifted slightly, her breath catching as confusion turned into something closer to panic. They are coming. The words came out in a trembling whisper, and Jake felt her body tense against his chest, the fragile trust she had started to build now shaking under the weight of what she remembered. He tightened his hold just enough to steady her, his voice low and firm as he spoke close to her ear, not loud, not rushed, but certain. Listen to me. You are safe with me. I'm not letting them take you anywhere. Her breathing hitched again, but she did not pull away, did not fight him. Instead, her small hands clutched at his jacket more tightly, holding on as if she had already made the choice to believe him, even if part of her was still afraid. Jake moved forward, pushing through a cluster of low branches that brushed against his arms, ignoring the sharp edges as he kept her protected, his focus narrowing to the path ahead, searching for anything that could give them an advantage. The terrain shifted again, opening slightly into a shallow clearing where the trees thinned just enough to reveal the faint outline of an old drainage ditch cutting across the land, deeper than it first appeared, its edges uneven and partially concealed by overgrowth. Jake slowed for the first time, his eyes scanning it quickly, calculating depth, slope, and most importantly, visibility, and the decision came almost instantly. This was their best chance. He stepped down carefully, lowering himself into the ditch with controlled movement, keeping the girl secure as his boots found the uneven ground below. And once they were down, the surrounding brush swallowed them from view, creating a natural barrier that would hide them from anyone passing above. The engine behind them roared louder now, much closer, and Jake crouched low within the ditch, adjusting his position so the girl was shielded completely beneath the line of sight from the road. He lowered his head slightly, his voice barely above a breath as he spoke again. Stay very still. Do not make a sound. Her eyes were open now, wide and alert despite the exhaustion pulling at her, and she nodded faintly, pressing herself closer against him as if she could disappear into his shadow. The sound of the vehicle approached the edge of the path, tires crunching against gravel and dirt, the headlights casting a faint glow that filtered through the trees above them, sweeping across the ground just beyond the ditch. Jake remained motionless, every muscle locked in place, his breathing slow and controlled as he listened to the vehicle idle, the engine vibrating through the quiet night like a warning that had finally arrived. A door opened somewhere above, followed by the faint sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving closer to the edge of the path. The girl's grip tightened suddenly, her body trembling against him, and Jake responded instantly, his hand covering hers firmly, grounding her without a word, a silent command to hold steady. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away, close enough that Jake could hear the shift of weight, the subtle movement of someone scanning the area, searching, listening, and for a moment, time seemed to slow, every second stretching as the tension pressed in from all sides. Then a voice broke the silence, low and irritated. She cannot have gone far. Check the trees. Jake's gaze hardened as he lowered his head slightly, shielding the girl further as the light above shifted again, moving away, but not far enough. Not yet. They were still searching, and they were getting closer. The footsteps above the ditch shifted slowly, deliberate and heavy, crushing dry leaves and loose dirt as they moved closer to the edge, and Jake felt the girl's body tense against him in a way that was no longer just fear. It was recognition, the kind that came from knowing exactly who was out there and what they were capable of. He lowered his head slightly, his shoulder angling just enough to shield her face completely as the faint beam of light passed over the ground above them. Close enough now that he could see the outline of boots near the edge of the ditch, the shadow stretching down toward them like a warning. The man above paused, the silence stretching tight, as if he was listening for something, any sound, any movement that might give them away, and Jake slowed his breathing even further, forcing it into a steady rhythm, his chest barely rising, barely falling, his entire focus locked on control. The girl's fingers pressed into his jacket, trembling, and he responded without looking at her, his hand tightening over hers in a firm, grounding hold that said everything without a single word. Stay still. The light shifted again, sweeping slightly to the left, then back, lingering for a moment at the edge before pulling away, just enough to break direct visibility, and the man exhaled sharply above, his voice cutting through the night with quiet frustration. She was here. I know she was. Another voice responded from a few feet away, lower, more impatient. Then find her. She cannot just disappear. The sound of movement followed, branches snapping as one of them pushed deeper into the trees, while the other remained near the ditch, pacing slowly, each step measured, each pause intentional, as if trying to draw out a reaction. Jake did not move, did not react, but his mind was already working, tracking positions, distances, patterns, because waiting alone would not hold them forever, and the longer they stayed, the higher the chance of being discovered. The girl shifted slightly again, her breathing becoming uneven, and he felt it immediately, the subtle rise of panic returning as the voices above stirred something deeper in her memory. Her head turned slightly against his chest, and a faint sound escaped her lips, barely audible but dangerous enough in the silence that Jake reacted instantly, his hand moving to gently but firmly steady her, his voice a low whisper against her ear. Breathe slow. Stay with me. You are safe. Her body tensed for a second, then eased just enough, her breathing still shaky but quieter now, controlled enough to keep them hidden. Above them, the footsteps moved again, this time closer to the edge, and for a split second, a small piece of dirt broke loose, sliding down the side of the ditch and landing near Jake's boot with a soft, unmistakable sound. The man stopped immediately. Silence followed, heavy and sharp, and Jake's entire body locked in place. Every instinct firing at once as the beam of light snapped back toward the edge, stronger now, more focused. He could see it cutting through the darkness above, inches from where they were hidden, the edge of it catching the brush just above his shoulder. The man took a step closer, then another. The ground shifted slightly under his weight, and Jake knew. That one more step would bring him into direct view of the ditch. The girl's grip tightened suddenly, her fingers digging into his jacket as fear spiked again, and Jake made a decision in that instant. Not reactive, not desperate, but precise. He shifted his weight just enough to reach a small rock near his foot, his movements slow and controlled, and with a careful flick of his fingers, he sent it rolling in the opposite direction, deeper into the brush beyond the ditch. The sound was soft, but in the silence it was enough. The man's head snapped toward it immediately, the beam of light following, cutting away from the edge as he stepped back, his voice sharp now. Over there. Check it. Branches cracked as he moved away, pushing through the trees toward the sound, and the second set of footsteps followed, leaving the edge of the ditch momentarily clear. Jake did not wait. He moved instantly, rising from his crouch with controlled speed, pulling the girl securely against him as he climbed out of the ditch on the opposite side, his boots finding purchase in the uneven dirt as he pushed forward into deeper cover. The girl clung to him without hesitation now, her fear redirected into silent trust, her body moving with his as if she understood what was happening without needing to be told. Behind them, the sound of branches breaking grew louder again as the men realized the distraction, their voices rising in frustration, sharper now, closer to anger. Jake did not look back. He moved forward through the trees with purpose, every step carrying them further from danger. But he knew this was only a temporary escape. They were not done searching. And now, they knew someone was helping her. Branches snapped behind them, louder now, sharper, no longer searching but chasing, and Jake pushed forward through the trees with controlled urgency, his boots finding rhythm on uneven ground as he adjusted his pace to balance speed and silence. Every step deliberate, every movement calculated to stay ahead without giving away more than he had to. The girl clung to him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her breath uneven against his shoulder as the fear behind them pressed closer. And for the first time since he found her, she did not try to speak, did not question. She simply held on, trusting him completely now in a way that carried more weight than anything else in this moment. Jake angled left as the terrain shifted, guiding them toward a narrow ridge that rose slightly above the surrounding ground, not high enough to expose them, but enough to give him a better sense of direction. And as he reached the edge of it, he slowed just long enough to listen, to measure the distance behind them. Voices carried through the trees, closer than before, louder, sharper with frustration, and that told him everything he needed to know. They were moving faster now. He adjusted his grip on the girl, shifting her slightly to ease the strain on his arm, and she responded instinctively, repositioning without resistance, her head resting against his shoulder as if she had already accepted that this was where she belonged, at least for now. The ridge sloped downward on the other side, leading into thicker brush, and Jake moved carefully down the incline, his boots sliding slightly on loose dirt before finding traction again, his balance steady despite the added weight, his focus never breaking. The sound of an engine roared again behind them, not the same steady idle as before, but a surge of power, aggressive, closing distance along the road they had left, and Jake knew what that meant. They were repositioning. Cutting him off. His eyes scanned ahead quickly, searching for anything that could shift the odds, and then he saw it, faint but unmistakable through the trees, a thin line of light stretching low across the horizon. Not headlights, not movement, but something constant, something still. A building, maybe more than one. The edge of town. It was not far, but it was far enough that getting there would not be easy, not with people actively hunting them. He exhaled slowly, his decision forming instantly, and without slowing further, he adjusted his direction toward that distant light, committing fully to the path ahead. The girl stirred slightly, her voice weak but clearer now as she spoke against his shoulder. They will not stop. The words were not a question. They were a warning, something she knew from experience, and Jake tightened his hold just slightly as he answered in a low, steady tone. Neither will I. The ground leveled out as they pushed forward, the trees thinning just enough to allow more light. Through, and the faint outline of structures became clearer ahead. Old fencing, a broken gate, the edge of a forgotten property that sat between the wild stretch of land and the outskirts of town. Jake slowed just enough to approach carefully, scanning for movement, for signs that this place was occupied or watched. But there was nothing, only silence and decay, the kind of place people passed by without a second thought. Perfect. He moved through the broken gate and into the shadow of the structure beyond, positioning himself just inside the cover where he could see out without being seen, his breathing controlled, his focus sharp as he listened again. Behind them, the voices had spread out, no longer clustered, moving in a wider pattern, searching deeper into the trees, and the engine noise shifted again, circling, probing the edges, trying to anticipate where they would emerge. Jake looked down at the girl, her face pale but calmer now, her eyes half open as she looked up at him, no longer with fear, but with something else, something that resembled hope. He adjusted the jacket around her once more, securing it firmly as his gaze lifted back toward the faint lights of town just beyond the property line. They were close. Close enough to reach safety if they moved at the right moment. But not yet. Not until he was sure. The sound of a branch snapping somewhere behind them pulled his attention back instantly. Closer than before, too close, and Jake's posture shifted again, lowering slightly, ready, waiting, every instinct aligned toward the same outcome. He had bought them time. Now he had to make it count. The branch snapped again, closer this time, sharp enough to cut through the silence like a warning, and Jake's body reacted instantly, lowering his center of gravity as he shifted deeper into the shadow of the broken structure, positioning himself between the sound and the girl without even thinking about it. The faint glow from the distant town lights barely reached this far, leaving most of the area wrapped in darkness. But Jake did not need much visibility, not when every instinct he had was already telling him exactly where the danger was coming from. The girl's fingers tightened against his jacket again, her breathing quickening as she felt the shift in him, the tension rising, and this time she did. Not try to hide it. They are close. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of certainty, and Jake nodded once, his eyes never leaving the direction of the sound. I know. His voice stayed calm, steady, not for himself, but for her, because fear could spread faster than anything else if he let it. He adjusted his grip slightly, lowering her just enough so she could sit supported against the wall behind them while he remained crouched in front of her, one hand still resting firmly on her shoulder, grounding her, anchoring her to the present. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, you do not move. She nodded quickly, her eyes wide but focused now, not lost in panic anymore, but locked onto him, trusting him completely in a way that made his chest tighten for a different reason. The sound came again, footsteps this time, slow, deliberate, moving along the edge of the property just beyond the broken fence, and then the faint beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the ground, searching, probing every shadow. Jake leaned slightly to the side, just enough to get a clearer view without exposing himself, and through the gaps in the structure, he saw them, two figures moving carefully along the perimeter, one slightly ahead of the other, both scanning the area with practiced precision. These are not random men searching blindly. They knew what they were doing. The first man paused near the broken gate, his light sweeping across the entrance, lingering just long enough to study the ground, the disturbed dirt, the faint signs of movement that Jake had tried to minimize but could not erase completely. He crouched slightly, examining something, then looked up, his posture tightening. She came through here. The second man moved closer, his voice lower, sharper. Then she's still close. Spread out. The flashlight beam shifted again, moving toward the structure, and Jake felt the moment compress, every second narrowing into a single point of decision. Running now would make noise. Staying still would not hold forever. He glanced back at the girl for just a fraction of a second, enough to see the fear in her eyes, but also the strength, the way she was holding herself together because he told her to, because she believed him. That was enough. Jake turned his focus. Forward again, his expression hardening into something unyielding, and as the beam of light edged closer, he made his move. He shifted slightly to the side, picking up a loose piece of rusted metal from the ground with controlled precision, and with a quick, silent motion, he threw it toward the far side of the structure, away from their position. The metal struck against the wall with a sharp echo, loud in the stillness, and both men reacted instantly, their lights snapping toward the sound as they moved to investigate. Now, Jake did not speak the word, but his body acted on it immediately, turning back to the girl as he reached for her, lifting her smoothly into his arms with practiced strength, her body responding without hesitation as she wrapped her arms around him again. He moved fast but controlled, slipping out through the opposite side of the structure, staying low, using every shadow to his advantage as he pushed toward the edge of the property and the faint lights beyond. Behind them, the men's voices rose in confusion, Then anger as they realized the distraction, their footsteps shifting direction. Faster now, more aggressive. Jake did not look back. He did not need to. The only thing that mattered was forward. The girl pressed closer against him, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. "You're not leaving me." Jake tightened his hold just slightly as he moved, his answer immediate, unwavering. "Not now. Not ever." And for the first time since this began, he felt it clearly, not just the need to protect, but the certainty that he would see this through no matter how far it went. The edge of the property line came into view just ahead, a break in the overgrown brush where the land gave way to a narrow dirt access road that connected to the outskirts of town, and Jake pushed toward it with controlled urgency, his breath steady, his pace measured despite the pressure building behind him. The sounds of pursuit had changed again, no longer scattered but focused, voices calling out sharper now, closer, their frustration turning into coordination, and Jake knew that meant they were no longer guessing, they were tracking. He stepped over the last stretch of uneven ground and onto the dirt road, pausing just long enough to scan both directions, his eyes adjusting quickly to the slightly brighter environment where distant streetlights cast a faint amber glow across the open space. Empty. For now. He moved immediately, crossing the road and slipping into the shadow of a row of abandoned storage units that lined the edge of the town boundary, their metal doors rusted and partially broken, offering cover but also risk if someone decided to search them. The girl shifted in his arms again, more alert now, her head lifting as she looked around with a mixture of confusion and fear, her voice weak but clearer than before. "Where are we?" Jake slowed just enough to steady her as he moved along the side of the nearest unit, keeping to the darkest edge where the light did not reach. "Close to somewhere safe. Stay with me." Her eyes searched his face, trying to understand, trying to hold on to something solid in the chaos. And then she nodded faintly, her trust no longer fragile, but forming into something stronger with each moment he did not let her fall. A sudden burst of sound behind them cut through the quiet, an engine revving hard, much closer now, followed by the glare of headlights spilling onto the road they had just crossed, sweeping wide as the vehicle turned sharply, stopping just short of the property line. They had found the exit. Jake did not stop moving. He reached the corner of the storage row and slipped around it, positioning himself out of direct sight as the light washed across the ground behind them, his body shielding the girl completely as he pressed into the narrow space between two units. The voices followed seconds later, louder now, one of them calling out with urgency. "They came this way. Check the buildings." Jake's jaw tightened as he glanced down at the girl, her eyes wide again, fear returning as the distance between them and those men collapsed rapidly. And for a moment he weighed his options with sharp precision. Staying hidden here would not last long. Running across open ground would expose them. There was only one move left. He lowered himself slightly, bringing his face closer to hers, his voice firm but calm, cutting through the panic before it could take hold. "Listen to me. We're going to move fast. You hold on and do not let go. No matter what you hear, you stay with me. Do you understand?" She nodded immediately, her arms tightening around his neck as if the instruction had locked something into place inside her, and Jake rose in one smooth motion, adjusting his grip before stepping out from the narrow gap, and moving quickly along the backside of the units, away from the light, toward the far end where the structures opened into a wider alley that led directly into town. Behind them, the beam of a flashlight cut across the corner they had just left, sweeping rapidly, searching, and a voice shouted out again. Closer now, sharper. "Over here." Jake did not look back. He moved forward with controlled speed, his boots hitting the ground in a steady rhythm as he reached the end of the row and turned into the alley, the faint glow of streetlights ahead growing stronger, clearer, marking the edge of a place where visibility would increase, but so would the chance of witnesses. The girl pressed her face into his shoulder, her grip unrelenting, and Jake felt it, the trust, the reliance, the unspoken belief that he would not let anything happen to her, and it drove him forward with a clarity that cut through everything else. The sound behind them surged again as the men realized where they had gone, their footsteps echoing against the metal structures as they gave chase. Faster now, no longer cautious, no longer quiet. Jake pushed harder, closing the distance to the street ahead, The open space just beyond the alley, now fully visible, lit by overhead lamps and the distant glow of a gas station across the road. Safety was within reach, but so were they. And as Jake stepped out of the alley and into the light, he knew the next few seconds would decide everything. The moment Jake stepped into the light, everything changed. The soft amber glow of the street lamps washed over him and the girl in his arms, cutting through the darkness that had hidden them for so long. And for the first time that night, they were no longer invisible. Across the street, a small gas station stood open, its fluorescent lights bright and steady, illuminating a parked truck, a man standing near the pump, and a clerk visible through the glass window inside. Normal life. Witnesses. Safety, if he could reach it in time. Behind him, the sound of footsteps burst. Out of the alley, fast and uncontrolled now, no longer cautious, and a voice shouted sharply, close enough to carry across the open space. There they are. Jake did not hesitate. He moved forward immediately, his stride long and steady. Not running, not panicking, but deliberate control, because panic would draw attention in the wrong way, and what he needed now was the right kind of attention. The girl held onto him tightly, her face buried against his shoulder, her body trembling but no longer resisting. And as they crossed the street, headlights from a passing car swept over them, briefly illuminating the scene in stark clarity. The man by the pump turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in the situation. The biker, the child, the urgency that hung in the air like something about to break. Jake reached the edge of the gas station lot just as the two men emerged from the alley behind him, slowing slightly as they stepped into the light. Their confidence shifting the moment they realized they were no longer alone. For a brief second, everything froze. The distance between them closed to a few yards, the tension thick enough to feel, and Jake turned just enough to face them, positioning his body so the girl remained completely shielded behind his shoulder. His expression was calm, but his eyes were not. They were sharp, focused, unyielding. One of the men stepped forward, his voice lower now, controlled but edged with frustration. That is our kid. You need to hand her over. Jake did not move, did not blink. The silence stretched for a second longer than comfortable, and then he answered, his voice steady and clear, carrying just enough to be heard by everyone around them. No. The single word landed with weight, cutting through whatever story they were trying to build. And in that moment, the man by the pump took a step closer, his gaze shifting between them, reading the situation in a way that no lie could fully cover. The second man hesitated, his posture tightening as he glanced around, noticing the attention, the lights, the eyes now watching. This was no longer a place where they could act without consequence. The first man tried again, his tone sharper now. You do not understand. Jake took one step forward, closing the space just enough to make his presence undeniable, his voice dropping slightly, quieter but far more dangerous. I understand enough. She is not going anywhere with you. The girl's grip tightened behind him, her small hands clutching his jacket, and for the first time since this began, she spoke clearly, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. I didn't want to go back. The words broke, whatever control the situation still held. The man by the pump pulled out his phone immediately, already dialing, his voice firm as he spoke. I am calling the police. You better step back. That was all it took. The balance shifted completely. The two men exchanged a quick look, calculation replacing aggression, and without another word, they stepped back, retreating toward the alley, their urgency gone, replaced by the need to disappear before the situation escalated further. Within seconds, they were gone. The tension in Jake's shoulders eased slowly, not all at once, but enough to signal the danger had passed, at least for now. He turned back toward the gas station, lowering his head slightly as he spoke to the girl, his voice softer now, steady in a different way. It is over. You are safe. Her grip loosened just enough for her to look up at him, her eyes still tired, still uncertain, but no longer filled with fear. Just relief. She nodded faintly, her head resting against him once more, and this time when her eyes closed, it was not from exhaustion alone, but from the quiet understanding that she was finally somewhere she did not have to run. Jake stood there for a moment longer, the lights of the station reflecting off the worn leather of his jacket, the noise of normal life returning around them. And for the first time in a long time, the weight in his chest felt different. Lighter. Not gone, not forgotten, but changed. He had not walked away this time. And because of that, neither had she.